Welcome to the By Design radio program. My name is Dr. James Proodian of Proodian Healthcare and ProodianHealthcare.com, where health literacy is the key to longevity. And as long as God has us on this side of eternity, my show is designed to help educate you and your families to feel better, function better, and live as many quality, disease-free years as possible. Thanks for joining me this week as we went through a couple of weeks on chronic illness, and I hope you enjoyed those two shows. If you want to catch up on my shows, please go to my YouTube channel. Just simply go to Proodian Healthcare and click YouTube, and you'll see I have a whole channel with all of my By Design programs there ready for you to listen to. I greatly appreciate the feedback that you guys are listening to the pre-recorded shows, or the recorded shows, I should say. We have 100 of them now done, and feel free to go back and take a look at them. Today I'm going to be breaking away from chronic illness. We were doing Dr. Bland's book. I'm going to come back to it, but I wanted to take a couple of weeks and talk about a subject matter that maybe I always try to pick subjects with you guys that, again, we're honoring God's plan. And when I wrote By Design, remember the whole purpose of this show is that I'm not a pastor, and I'm on a radio station that is a teaching station. So you should listen to all the great teachers on the bridge. I'm not a pastor, but my show, I wanted to align to what's God's plan for us, meaning that from a nutritional, physical, and psychological perspective, how do we follow God's plan, the plan that He designed for us that man has basically destroyed in so many ways? And today, kind of follows suit to that. We're going to be talking about eating green and basically making a case for a plant-based diet. I'm not saying this is right for everyone. I'm not saying that man was not designed to eat meat. That's not my point. My point of today's show is to taking a look at what man has done to the meat supply, or the way meat has been produced, which you hopefully will see was not God's design. So remember Luke 1:37, for with God nothing is impossible. And that Bible quote, Bible verse to me means with better education, better knowledge, we can make better decisions and choices for our family. So the content of today's show, and maybe even next week, is going to come from Nutrition Action, which is, this came out in this edition I'm going back to in my archives, was written in 2006. And, you know, I go back to the 70s when Rachel Carson wrote a book called Silent Spring. And I got involved in nutrition ecology pretty heavily in the 80s, and really taking a look at what man has done to our ecology, and looking at steak, looking at beef today, and the way beef is raised. So again, I try to draw a subject matter that maybe you don't put a lot of time or thought into thinking about, but maybe when you sit down and have that next juicy steak or a roast beef sandwich, some of these things will hopefully ring true in your mind, because most people know that beef increases the risk of heart disease, and some people know they don't know much about the livestock industry. So here's what's going on with respect to raising animals for food. It takes a heavy toll on the environment. Livestock, raising requires a great deal, an enormous amount of fuel, fertilizers, pesticides, water, and land. So, for instance, if the entire world's population were to eat as much meat as we do in the West, we'd quickly run out of land and irrigation. So looking at the way we basically manufacture meat, let's start off with which food, basically harms the environment. And the primary answer is grain-fed beef. Now, I've done shows with you on the fact that, cows are supposed to be consuming grass. They're supposed to graze. They're supposed to run around. Man has stepped in and changed the actual biochemical nature of the steak that we're eating if you eat meat. So grain-fed beef, it's basically an environmental debacle, because what goes in has to come out. Cattle spends 3/4 of their lives out on the range. They do eat grass, but in the last part of their life, they spend their final months in a feedlot, and they're basically fed corn, soybean meal, and a lot of drugs to keep them alive and to keep them fat. So we replace the food that God designed the cow to eat with a lot of inflammatory food that allows them to gain a lot of weight, and we feed them a lot of drugs. So growing that grain requires a vast amount of land, irrigation and water, pesticides and fertilizer. So some of those pesticides and fertilizers, right, plus manure and antibiotics and hormones, they erode the soil and they end up polluting our water and our air. So you need the grain to feed the cattle, okay? So what goes in comes out, and it's primarily this grain-fed beef, because beef, animals like this were not designed to eat grain. They were designed to eat grass. So I've shared with you why grass-fed beef is the way to go if you choose to eat beef. But let's continue the conversation. Does it take a lot of grain to produce a steak? Well, it takes about 7 pounds of grain to put 1 pound of weight on cattle in feedlots. So because much of the weight that they gain goes into the bone, the organs, and other basically tissue that you don't eat, it takes more feed to produce the actual part of the animal that we do eat. So most grains are eaten, directly by people. Outside the United States, livestock consumes only 21% of the total grain production. But in the United States, about 66% of all the grain and hay that we grow end up being fed to animals. So that's a lot. And what ends up happening is you need a lot of land to produce that much grain. So most of the Midwest grasslands and the forests, you see, they've been replaced by grain farms. They used to grow things that were good for us, but now they're growing these grain farms and 100 million acres of feed crop that we grow for livestock that robs our topsoil of the nutrients and it causes erosion. So to compensate for the soil's lost productivity, farmers apply fertilizer and chemicals and manure. And what ends up happening to all of that stuff is that we're growing mostly corn to feed the livestock. So this conversation is about really how much land and energy it takes to grow the product that we're feeding to the animal that they weren't designed to eat in the first place. And it produces so much waste and erosion and toxic chemicals that are going back into the soil, and it's creating a ton of pollution. So this is the problem with fertilizers and pollutions, is we have to use them to create the animal. And the animal, which was designed by God, is almost like a Frankenstein animal because it was never designed in the first place to be eating this type of food. We're feeding it this type of food because it makes it juicier and it tastes better. So, eating green, the conversation here is how do we stay healthy? How do we follow God's plan? We know that God designed us to eat an abundance of dark green leafy vegetables and fruits. Okay, if we're going to eat beef, let's once again look for the grass-fed beef. So let's talk about how feed grain affects our water supply. Now, when these farmers need to use huge amounts of irrigation to water and to grow the feed grains. Okay, so in order to get this grain to grow, you need huge amounts of land and water. Now, to do this, the water could be obviously put for better use in our cities and other places, but by using this much water, it takes about 18,000 gallons of rain and irrigation water to produce a pound of beef. Now, that's a lot of water. So together, raising livestock and irrigating the crops that they consume, over half of all fresh water used in the United States is used for the purpose of our livestock. Half, guys, of the fresh water in the United States is used just to raise beef. That's how big of an industry this is. And so, once again, you step back, you're a by design student, and you say, is that God's plan? What did God design for us? Were we designed to re-engineer his food that he created for us to create this byproduct, this food that's not only polluting our environment, not only eroding our soils, but it's not good for us? Okay, so between the pesticides and the other things we're talking about, we're also talking about the effect to our environment, and not to mention the vast amount of land that it takes to grow the wheat. So when we look at beef consumption, we have to say to ourselves, Between the carbon dioxide and the other gases that get trapped in the atmosphere during this process, it has a profound change in our environment. Because what ends up happening, guys, is this amount of carbon dioxide and methane gas, okay, from the cow is being trapped in our environment. Now, cows put out a lot of this methane gas. So, for instance, when we're producing the cow, when we're producing this product, which again is not a man-made product, nitrous oxide from decomposing manure and from the fertilizer that's applied to the cropland has a global impact. It impacts the way byproducts of the fertilizer and of the methane are trapped in our environment. So this is a very, very important subject matter. Our Earth that the Lord gave us, I'm not a global warming guy, but I'm also not a global warming guy. What I am is I am a God guy. And as a God guy, I want to protect the Earth that God gave us. We all should believe that we shouldn't throw our garbage down the street, or we shouldn't throw our garbage into the water. Well, the same conversation should be made about fertilizers, gases that are produced by the farming or the manufacturing of these cattle, which are having an impact on our environment. So if the whole goal of this conversation, which is, what I think most Americans should do, is to simply cut back on their beef consumption. Not only cut back on it, but if we're going to consume beef, making sure it's grass-fed. Because once again, grass-fed beef does not have the inflammatory effect that the grain-fed beef does. It doesn't have the fat content that the grain-fed beef does, and it's a healthier product for us. So as we look at beef and we look at the impact of highly inflammatory red meat that is manufactured and created by man, which was not God's design, we're seeing now the impact it has on human physiology and our health, which does tie in to the last couple weeks' shows on chronic illness. Chronic illness, which is plaguing our country, most of which is man-made, most of which is man-manufactured. So when we talk about going to our doctors and asking questions and being thorough, we also want to step back and look at what is the ecology that God designed on our planet. Okay, so we look at the earth, we look at the atmosphere, we look at the soil and the water, and we look at man's impact on the pollution and the degradation of this earth by what it manufactures. And I don't mean just like steel manufacturing and building buildings. I'm now talking about food manufacturing. The impact of food manufacturing, in this case I'm using beef as that example, is huge. Okay, it is really, really huge. So when we look at eating maybe a partial vegetarian diet, or understanding that the green-based diet or a plant-based diet can make a major difference in your longevity, how you feel, how you think, we could understand that, red meat, dairy foods, eggs are the, biggest sources of saturated fat and cholesterol, and they promote heart disease, which is the #1 killer in the United States. So we have to forget about this notion that everything is genetic. That's just, I think, man's way of deflecting. Okay, we have the ability to impact our health by the decisions we make every day. And those decisions, when you go shopping and you look at the red meat and you look at the saturated fat in that red meat and you understand its effect on prostate health, colon health, heart health, and even the impact it has on cancer, this is a very important subject matter, because I'm not an ecologist, okay? That's not my trade. I've studied it, but I'm looking at the ecology of our world and I'm saying, okay, forget about if you're global warming or not global warming. Doesn't it just make sense to take better care of God's environment? Doesn't it just make common sense? In our homes, we recycle. In our homes, we should be looking for fabrics and things that we buy that are not man-manufactured, that are not toxic to us. And we want to take the time to learn how God has provided us the resources necessary to live, and looking at what man has done with those resources. So the grass-fed beef, remember, is much better for us. You want to buy the leaner cuts. Don't spend your money on the expensive cuts. Get the leaner cuts. They're much healthier for us. And if you are going to change over to a plant-based diet, stop. You need to learn what a plant-based diet is. No one go vegetarian. Do not just start eating a plant-based diet unless you're educated on how to eat a plant-based diet that's right for you. Remember, we're all very, very different. So we want to start, if we're going to start by changing our dietary habits and move more to a plant-based diet, make sure you consult with someone who's in the industry, who's in the business, to know the right type of plant-based diet for you. Thank you so much for listening to me this week, Dr. James Proodian of the By Design radio program. If you have any questions for me, please go to proodianhealthcare.com and submit any questions that you would like me to cover on a show. And please go to my YouTube channel. You could go through the 100 or so shows that I've done, see what topic interests you, and feel free to send me an email on comments and suggestions. Thanks so much for listening to me this week. God bless, and I'll talk to you soon.